And we are just beginning. There's going to be so much more, especially when we get to the Brit Hadashah, as we're laying a foundation here. I hope this is starting to make some sense as we're starting to see these things lay out, because in the Brit Hadashah, all of the writers there use some very strong language to deal with the idea of light and darkness. And so it's very important that we understand by the time we get there how it's been used. Because remember, those terms are going to be being used in the Brit Hadashah to people that are familiar with the Tanakh. And so they will have already understood when someone uses these phrases what they mean, okay? All right, so this is the time we call the Afterburn. If you have comments or questions, you can go ahead and raise your hand. If you're online, you can go ahead and Kurt Meyer, and I guess Manny's going to go back there and assist, are going to help with the online live stream. And let's try and keep it to the beginnings of this teaching. And we can begin. I guess, Steve, you have something you want to say.
This is, I think, is a good topic for us, or maybe for me, because it seems that, I don't know if this is starting off right, but it's that some stay from the light because they still enjoy the things which we feel are comfortable, leaving it in the dark. So it's not revealed. So we can continue enjoying our stuff in the darkness rather than bringing it to light and addressing it.
Amen. Amen. And I'm going to ask everybody to be really patient with this being just part one. I don't know how many parts it's going to be. I don't think it'll be necessarily long. We covered a lot already, in this first part, but just be patient as this develops. This is, again, that revealing of light. Don't do your conclusion jumping. Don't try to fill in the blanks before we get there too much, okay? But have open readiness and anticipation for the revealing, okay? Because, again, I started in Genesis. I almost started in John 1. I could have started there. Didn't really know where to start. But I thought, because what's being taught in the Brit is based on what people already would have understood from the Tanakh, I said, well, let's just start there, try to go through somewhat chronologically. We are jumping around a little bit when I find verses that are referring to another place, like Luke we went to after dealing with something in Isaiah, but just so that we can go around and back and forth. But be patient with this as we go through. Okay, next. Rick?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting how you made the correlation between coming out of darkness into light, as in being born, coming out of the womb, a place of darkness into light. And I made the correlation, when Yeshua said you must be born again, as dispersed Israelites or Gentiles, whatever, that were living in darkness throughout the world. And, born again is a big Christian term. When did you become saved? Isn't that really when Abba opened our eyes to the truth of his Torah? We came into the light at that point. And it's a continuing process because it's continuing to be revealed to us through Melchizedekian teachers like yourself.
Amen. And we will be eventually getting to the conversation with Nicodemus as part of the teaching, and there will be some things to deal with some of the stuff you just talked about. It's in my notes to get to deal with a little bit of the conversation Yeshua had with Nicodemus that deals with the whole idea of being born again. Okay, so again, look, this is part one of something that we're just beginning to lay the foundations to. So it's going to take a little while for you to understand where we're going. The main points were the beginning pieces about being a place, a natural state at the beginning and something birthed out of and revealing, coming out of, etc. Let's just have those definitions start to be formed, and we can start to see how these things work and how Elohim brings structure and order and process, and that's light. Because that's what then takes the confusion and the things that are devoid of form and brings them into a form. Okay? You can take a slab of clay and you just mush it all around and whatever, and then it's formless until you impose structure on it. Okay? Same thing like a big hunk of rock. That hunk of rock could be somebody's face. If you were to sculpt it, it could be an animal, it could be a building, it could be anything. But you have to impose structure onto that piece of stone. Or you could take that stone and put other stones with it and build something. You're now imposing structure. And so like you would ask, and I think that the urban legends, they asked Michelangelo about, how do you make a horse like out of a big piece of granite? He says, I just chip away all the stuff that doesn't look like a horse. but he has to reveal the horse that was already in the granite. You understand? By chipping away and bringing structure to reveal the thing that was always there. That's also part of this whole idea. It was hidden inside of that rock. All right, same thing like a geode, all the beautiful stuff inside of a stone looks like a big ugly rock, and you crack it open, all this beautiful stuff on the inside. But you don't know till you open it up what's inside. Some of them don't have anything. Some of them have beautiful stuff. Who's next? Okay, Rabbi Tom.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
When the light came into the world in Bereshit 1:1, or chapter 1 rather, it came into a world totally devoid of life. And when the light comes into our lives and we begin to see things, I think it's important to remember that, one, we have to accept it, and we can always reject it too, if we so choose. So we have to accept it, and we have to nurture it and encourage it as it encourages us.
Amen. Amen. And notice that when it was devoid of life, in order to have life, life needs structure. So light comes in to bring structure, to bring life. Okay, light comes in to bring, because remember, there was the initial creation was in darkness. It was like a big hunk of clay with no form to it. And then light came in and brought form and brought structure, providing a place for life. Who's next? Okay.
So I was wondering, because Genesis 1, 3 through 5 has always been kind of confusing, and I've been really praying about it a lot lately, so I can understand it. So I was wondering if I could read these verses as saying, and Elohim said, let Torah come to be, and Torah came to be. And Elohim saw the Torah, that it was good. And Elohim separated the Torah from the anti-Torah. And Elohim called the Torah day, and the anti-Torah he called night. And there came to be evening, and there came to be morning, day one. Could that be read that way?
Certainly. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only way. I mean, again, remember, there's yes, yes, and yes, not like either or, but also. That's certainly a way to do it. Because remember, physical light, as we would think of things, doesn't show up till day 4. All right, sun, moon, stars. And so this is day 1. And so what light is there at day 1 before physical light? Now, we're going to end all of this eventually in Revelation 22, where there's no more need of sun and moon for light, because Yahweh is the light that will be illuminating in the forever kingdom. And so, I mean, that will be the wrap up on all of this. We'll go from Genesis, when he brings light into the world, all the way to a place that doesn't need the day 4 luminaries. Okay, so that's going to be our journey eventually to Revelation 22. Okay, next. Deirdre?
So I have 3 things written down, Rabbi. I'm going to start in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 19. And it talks about the people who are saying, let him hurry, let him hasten his work so that we see it.
Right.
Sorry, I'm pulling up my note app. So in Christianity, you know, we're always taught that when it came to Messiah, Judas forced the issue. Is that a correct analogy there, or am I completely off?
No, it's probably very similar. Okay, again, things were not happening the way the people thought they should. It wasn't happening fast enough. Wasn't happening in the playing out the way they had wanted it. You know, Judas, you know, we can assume had a zealot sort of background where he was hoping for a Moses to physically take them out of Rome, you know, to overthrow Roman authority and have a revolution that way. And Yeshua clearly was not doing that. And once he realized that, he sort of went to take matters in his own hands that way. But yeah, I mean, there's that impatience with, look, and it goes even back to in Exodus where they're at the sea and Moses says, Yahweh says to Moses, tell him, stand still, be still and see the deliverance. Look, Jeremiah has the same problem with them because they're seeking Egypt's help. They're seeking this one's help. They're seeking that one's help instead of just waiting on Yahweh to take care of them. And so finally he says, well, that's not going to work. They're not going to help you, and Babylon's going to come because you will not trust me. So you see this playing out with Jeremiah, okay?
Okay. So then, there was a verse that says, no image was revealed to you. In terms of, the Israelites couldn't see what Yahweh looked like. And yet, in Genesis, it mentioned that humans were made in his image. So instead of something physical, is it then correct to define in his image as his intrinsic nature or characteristics?
Yes, I mean, it's not literally always talking about a physical thing. Now, once we have physical structure, he uses the physical structure as metaphors to explain himself. So we see him described as having feet, landing on things and stepping on things, and having arms. We're having him described as a father, okay? Having the son described as a son. These are all things that are not literal from that point of view, because they're not human beings who have sex and have a baby and whatever, but these are the way we can understand things. So mostly what it's talking about is the intrinsic nature, the character. Let's make a physical being after our likeness, to be like we are. Now, would he have these kind of physicalities? We don't know. We don't know what that looks like. We don't understand. But he reveals himself to us like us. Now, just like if we were amoebas trying to reveal ourselves to an amoeba, we'd have to take the form of an amoeba, because amoeba wouldn't understand us. Right? So to understand us, he gives us human metaphors, human descriptions. So we can understand him, I'm saying. So knowing that we are human, he uses our things that we can relate to reveal himself.
That's why he came in human form.
That's why he came in human form.
Okay. And last one, a thought just struck me. Moshe drew near to Elohim while he was in the darkness. While all the other Israelites were, they were afraid, they were terrified. But Moses wasn't afraid, and the thought hit me that even in the darkness, the darkness is compared to being, something that is not revealed yet, or something that is hidden. So Moses wasn't afraid of the unknown or what was hidden. He wasn't afraid of the unknown because he knew Elohim was going to be there in the unknown. Is that all correct?
That's good. Also, I want to just sort of say that you want to find an anointed, appointed that's not afraid to do what Yahweh says to do, is not afraid to say what Yahweh says, who is not ruled by fear, but has a fear of Yahweh that's appropriate. Okay, in other words, an awe, a reverence, but is going to say what Yahweh needs him to say. Okay, what else?
That's it.
Okay,
Thank
next.
You.
Sarah Beth.
So you gave me another question, so now I have two. Going on Deirdre's made in our image, one of the things that they kind of taught in the church, and I'm not sure, I sort of heard you saying the same thing. And for simplicity, let's use the color code, that his image, that part of what he gave us is, you see all through Scripture, he's interested in knowing, having that relationship, having a relationship with people. That would be the blue. And he's very much the red leader, gets it done. Would that also be in our, he made us in his likeness?
Yeah, look, all of those elements do play out. He gave us all of the different characteristics of personalities because they're all useful and important. They all have positive and, negative aspects to them. But you can start to see different characteristics in the different people playing out, and where those characteristics either benefited them or didn't benefit them, And so, all right, hopefully that made some sense there, but yeah.
Second question, would it be correct to connect him causing the light to be with your story of the father and son conversation before the world, that this is where Yeshua came and owned, that this was his project?
Yep. Okay, and then introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Ryan. Shalom Aleichem from Texas. We are up here visiting family for the next month. I had a question for you. You mentioned Jeremiah 4, and the earth being formless and void and darkness once again upon it. When do you see that occurring?
Look, it occurs. He's using it as a metaphor for the people. It occurs before they get taken into exile. It's not in its fullness that way. So he's using it as as an extreme metaphor to explain to them, this is what you've done and this is what's going to happen to you because of it. So it's cyclically happening with it ultimate happening in the tribulation period. Okay?
And how do you deal with where it says, but there's no man on it?
Well, again, he's talking about specifically within the covenanted framework, not actually any human beings whatsoever. So, I mean, but it could also be talking about a point where there's no human beings and we get to a place where we all get to the extreme. But remember, everything about the conversations is always his discussion between the people that are covenanted, that are part of the story and the journey, and those that interact with them, that attach themselves to or not to them, interfere with or help what they're doing, etc. And so when he says, I didn't find a man, not one, he's talking about within the covenanted community to stand up and do things, not necessarily no human beings. Okay? Okay, Lynn?
I was curious, one of the scriptures that you read was about to not fear the reproach or the revilings. I know it was talking about, the outside, but does that also apply like within the camp, those that, it happens. And so by not participating and not fearing, just am I choosing, light at that moment, and then the other person is in a place of darkness, or?
All right, so let me kind of simplify that. It's a good question. All right, simplify that. You, all of you, all of us, we all need to do what is right, no matter what is happening around us or what feels like it's happening to us. Okay? So that means there will be those that will be reviling or doing whatever, and they may be doing that around you. They may even be doing it towards you. And so you have to make sure that it doesn't affect your decisions and your choices, that you do what you need to do regardless. But you also have to make sure that you're not judging them, that you're having mercy and compassion, that you're bringing it to the attention of anybody that needs to have the attention if it might be something that is contagious that could cause a problem in the body, but you're doing it out of love for everyone, including the person that's doing it. But we have to do what's right no matter what else is happening around us. And that's the hard part. So that's the light-darkness thing. The person that's doing the reviling may be in or headed towards some darkness, but you must stay in light by doing the things like when he says, love your enemies, when he says, turn the other cheek, when he says, offer your inner garment as well. All these things are saying, look, when these things happen to you, you must maintain walking in light. Don't use someone else's momentary darkness, or maybe they're fully in it, to cause you to end up being then in darkness. This is where I've said often, and you guys have to really embrace this, this is really important, that you can be right and right and right, but as soon as you do the wrong thing, all of that right gets wiped out. I've talked about that with topics like the nature of the Godhead or calendars or whatever it is. Maybe you're right. But you know what? If you can't walk in the fruit of the Spirit, if you can't treat the person you're talking to gently and lovingly and patiently and all of that stuff, you're wrong now. So you don't allow others to draw you into a place of darkness. In other words, where you're now wrong. You want to always stay in the light, do what's right. It's not easy to do what's right when there's darkness around you. It's not easy to do what's right when the darkness can tempt you to act like the darkness. Okay, and by the way, that doesn't mean the person is now completely lost and messed up. They could be just having that moment of darkness, which we all do. We get into that place where we're falling out of structure, our emotions have grabbed the hold of the steering wheel, and we're all messed up. And in that moment, we've lacked the structure necessary, and the structure comes usually in the form of logic and reason, which gets clouded by emotion. Okay? Feelings get out of the feelings bag on the floor, people start stepping all over them, and we're in trouble. Don't get drawn into that darkness. You need to maintain light. Not easy, which is why we're given really tough verses like loving an enemy, blessing those that curse you. These are all things that don't make sense because they are so easy to be tempted to be drawn into darkness. Okay, did that answer the question? Okay. Nobody said this would be easy, by the way. The easy thing is to be drawn right into the darkness. Go ahead, Kurt.
All right, Harrison Bryce. Could those with darkness or blindness to Torah have it as a barrier for hurting themselves? In other words, could darkness to Torah be used as protection so they can't go off and squander opened eyes?
Okay. Really good question, but not because of the question. But it brings up an important topic. Let's be really careful that we don't get sucked into or drawn into, like the wheat and the tares, like covenanted or not covenanted. Let's stop worrying about or trying to figure out what everybody's status is. Okay? Use judgment, don't end up judging. And so, when we try to figure out if somebody is in darkness, now that we've already decided that they're in darkness, don't do that. Okay? You don't know if they're in darkness. You don't know if you're in darkness. You just do the best you can, hoping that you're walking in light the best you can. This is just like the wheat and tares thing, And so you recognize that those are raised up together. They're in the assembly together, but they're not discernible as easily as you'd like to think, because he says you're not qualified to separate them lest you pluck out the wheat with the tares. And so let's do the same thing with darkness, please, and light. Let's not try to figure that out. Is there reasons why somebody might be left in darkness? Yes. May it be to protect them from something? Yes. So the question is not wrong from that point of view. I just want to be careful of the direction that could start taking our hearts and our minds. Because now, in order for you to go in that direction, you must have already decided that somebody is in darkness. Okay? You don't get to do that. Well, you can, but you shouldn't, okay? Don't do that. Just understand, yes, though, if there are people in darkness, and there are many out there, the world in general is mostly in darkness, yes, some of them are for protective reasons. They're not ready for it. There's the reasons why there's a reason why whatever age you were, let's say you were 47, or you were 52, or you were 25, or whatever age you were when he took you and opened up your eyes, there was a reason he didn't do it till that moment. Either A, because he protected you from something, or B, by protecting meaning that you would have just messed it up, you weren't ready for it or whatever. And that probably was the case, is that you had to suffer enough to get to the bottom of the bottom so you could look up and say, okay, I now need to let go of the reins. I realize I can't do this. All of us, he has to, by the way, if you haven't really gotten to that place, that's why you struggle in your walk, because you haven't let go. See, you have to suffer enough to finally lay flat on your back and go, okay, I quit. I can't do this. Not quit on life, but I quit on trying to run my life. I quit on trying to have the authority in my life. I'm going to start doing it your way. Okay? I now realize that my way leads to this, whatever this bottom, flat on your back place looks like. Okay, so let's just be careful with that. I'm glad you asked the question, though, because it gave me the opportunity to mention, let's please not be trying to figure out who's in light and who's in darkness. Look at only the plank in your own eye and worry about whether or not you are in light or you are in darkness. Amen? All right, next question.
All right, Olivier and Janet Hoffman, Exodus 10, verse 21. Will this be that the feeling that something is not right when we and or those around us are walking in darkness and not Torah?
Well, when he's talking about the darkness that is felt, look, he's using these as deep metaphors for separating out two groups of people. He wants to understand that if you're in the world, this is darkness that ultimately can be felt. When you're in the covenant, which he hasn't made yet with them, but he's bringing them towards, he's going to bring them out of Egypt, this is where there's light, life, structure, okay? And you can feel that lightness. I hate to use it as, another way of using the word light, and we're going to actually do that, interestingly enough, in a verse in the New Testament eventually. I think that is a great play on words. But understand that he's using the metaphor in Exodus to help them understand that is the world. As best as they knew it, Mitzrayim was the world. Egypt was the world. The capital of the world as they understood it. It was the center of the world that they knew. And it was in darkness that could be felt, while they, as slaves, are now experiencing light. So he's beginning to teach them these important concepts.
All right, from Andy, Noach, regarding Noach, when you quoted Deuteronomy 5, you mentioned Noah and him knowing how he knew what was clean and unclean. Oliver, who's age 11, wanted Rabbi to say, how did Noah know what was clean and unclean?
Okay, well, you have to understand that what we have in our book, and this is for, what's the boy's name? Who's this?
Boy's name was Oliver.
Oliver, okay. Your Bible, your scriptures covers about 4,000 years of history. And that's very hard to give us every little detail that happens over 4,000 years. I mean, think about how much happens in like a week in your life, and you're covering 4,000 years of history. And so when Moses wrote this down for us, the accounts that start in Genesis, he didn't show us how the instructions were given, starting in the garden and then starting going down through to Noah, to Abraham, etc. But what we do is see revealed evidence that they knew things, that they had been instructed. Okay? And the formality of it, in other words, giving it in an official capacity for the whole bigger group of people, instead of just a few individuals, was shared with Moses so that they could put it down in writing for us. But there's lots of evidence that these things were known to others throughout an earlier period of time. And so he hints at these things. You also have this, for example, in Genesis 26, in verse 5, it says, because Abraham obeyed my voice and guarded my charge, my commands, my laws, my Torah. Okay, so the Torah is mentioned there, and that's the Hebrew word there. It says Toratai, which means my Torah. But the Torah is mentioned there in Genesis 26, and this is well before Moses. Okay, so there was instruction. Now, it is believed that it was the Melchizedekian priesthood that was running schools to Yahweh to instruct. In the book of Jasher, which is not a book that's canonized, it's not one that we generally use, it demonstrates and explains that there was a yeshiva being run by Noah in which Abraham was taught. Okay, and so was Jacob actually taught in the same yeshiva. And then Shem eventually takes that over, and then Eber, and it kind of passes through. So, you know, we don't know if that's true or not, but it certainly seems like that would make sense. But the evidence for Oliver, anyway, so you know, is that sometimes we see things that are evidence that say, oh, wow, they knew something, so that means that if they knew it, somebody must have taught it to them. We just don't get to read about that part of it. We don't read about that until we get to Moses and the official giving of the codified law. All right, next question.
All right, question is, there's a Sabbath theory of Saturday morning versus Friday sundown based on the Hebrew. Morning, Bokar, Erev, sunset, Yom, daylight, along with John 11, verse 9 and 10. Can you speak on this?
All right, I'm not getting sucked into a sundown to sundown, morning to morning argument. John 11, what?
Verses 9 and 10.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with anything. Okay, he says they're not 12 hours in a day, and if anyone walks in the day, he doesn't stumble, and if anyone walks in the night. Okay, giving how many hours are in a day or a night doesn't have anything to do with the order of it. And plus, they lived in Jerusalem where most of the days were basically, you know, sundown was from 6 to 6, and so you had those sort of, you know, closer to the equator type of deals. But what we have going on here is that when you look at, and there are other verses that specifically about, for example, Yom Kippur in Leviticus 23, which talks about from sundown to sundown, you're going to keep your feast. All right? But also we have the Jewish community that unless you can show me where the Jews stopped doing it the way that they did it with Yeshua, or somehow they changed things, Yeshua did all of these things with the Jewish community and never corrected them on doing it. So you have to be able to show me that they kept the Sabbath differently in Yeshua's day and that the Jews changed it since. It's a little tough call to do because there's no evidence of it. Yeshua never corrected them, told them they were keeping Shabbat wrong on the wrong day in the wrong way. He kept it with them. It says often that he kept it with his Jewish brothers. So let's not get sucked into the latest, greatest flavor of, you know, I reject everything I've ever been taught, so we're going to find only new and fringe understandings. So now it's sun up to sun up instead of sundown to sundown. Look, didn't I just teach this? That things are birthed out of darkness. So we start with dark and we come to light. The month cycle starts in dark and comes to light. Okay? And then, of course, it goes back to dark. It's the fullness of the cycle. By the way, the nations in the world is going to do that too. We're going right back towards darkness where he's going to have to bring light again. Back to the confusion and chaos, just like it was in the flood, just like it was at the beginning of Genesis 1. We're going right back in that cycle. So the cycle also shows us a darkness then leads to light. Okay?
All right, from Olivia and Janet Hoffman again. Will fear of Yahweh versus fear and reverence, awe, adoration be like darkness versus light?
All right, say it one more time. Actually, wait, before you say that, sometimes I know I answer a question and another thought comes to my head. Please, will all of you do me a favor? No, do yourself a favor. Okay, this is important. Ephesians chapter 4, find yourself a teacher. Not any teacher. I mean your teacher, your mentor, your discipler, somebody that you can listen to. I don't mean discipleship like as an official relationship, but I mean somebody that can then take these questions, settle them for you, and end the confusion and chaos that's starting to form in your heads. Because there's a lot of that out there that will give you that kind of confusion in your mind. And it could be about the nature of the Godhead. There's tons of it about the calendar, tons of it about all kinds of things. You need a teacher. You don't need a bunch of opinions from a lot of teachers. And you need to ask the person who you're getting your information from, how long have they been doing this? What are their qualifications? And they don't have to have a teacher per se that they can point to who's another teacher, whatever. But you know what? If they've been doing this for a very short period of time, they're probably not qualified to be the expert deciding to change sundown to morning to morning. That's a big move. And you want to be making a big move, you might want to talk to somebody who's been doing this more than 5 years, 3 years, 6 years, whatever, and find out what their background is. Don't just listen to me. It doesn't have anything to do with me. You need to figure this out. You need I'm glad you asked me the question. The question is, if I'm your teacher, are you going to listen? Or if I'm not your teacher, are you just adding it to your opinion poll? That's up to you. But you need a teacher. You need to trust that Yah appointed and anointed somebody that's there to answer your questions. Unless, of course, you want to go back, the Ruach teaches me everything. Well, then why do you have questions? If the Ruach teaches you everything, you shouldn't have any questions. Just pray about it and get your answers. But the Ruach doesn't teach you everything. That's why you have questions. All right, now you can ask Janet and Olivia's other question.
All right. Will fear of Yahweh versus fear, reverence, awe, adoration be like darkness versus light?
Okay, so you're talking about being afraid of him, just acting, trembling in your boots, as opposed to having a proper awe and reverence? Yes, I guess that would be true. Because, some of the ones that got laid low in the desert, they were trembling in their boots, but they weren't actually reverent and fearing him in a proper way. The fear has to have an ultimate element of not wanting to disappoint, being afraid of letting him down. Listen to the fear of Yahweh teaching again. Okay?
All right, from Lori Bornstein, is Isaiah 49, verse 1 and 2. So this is Isaiah speaking or Yah, because to read it looks like Yah is talking to himself. Well, look, that gets confusing from time to time because he's speaking through these writers. These writers are writing down these documents like this is the thing Isaiah wrote down. And actually had a scribe working with him to write it down, but I'm sure. But he says, listen to me, O coastlands, and hear you, O people afar. Yahweh has called me from the womb. Okay, so this is, by the way, this could also be talking about Isaiah. See, this is not one of those either or things again. Just like when Isaiah is talking in chapter 7 about the one that would be born of the virgin, he was talking about a literal birth that was going to happen in his lifetime as well as talking about Messiah. So we have to be careful that we're not trying to limit things, but understand that there are fulfillments, and then there's the ultimate fulfillment it's pointing to. All right? Israel, to a degree, is the servant. Okay? Israel was formed from the womb it was birthed out of to be his servant as a nation. And so you can look at it in many, many different levels to what it's ultimately pointing towards, which is Yeshua. Okay? And that's part of the arguments that people make for people against, the anti-missionaries that are against the belief in Messiah. Some of the arguments they make are the arguments that would take these chapters towards the end of Isaiah, especially when you get to like 53, and say that it's talking about the nation of Israel and not about Messiah. And the answer is, yes, it is talking about the nation of Israel, but yes, it is talking about Messiah. It's not either or,
Okay, next question.
Pete Lamb. Can Rabbi Steve distinguish between light spoken of in Genesis 1 and the Shekinah? Or as you would say, Shekinah.
Well, it's the light talking of in Genesis 1 is talking about bringing an element into the universe that's going to now bring order, structure, etc., and form, whereas the Shekinah is talking about a level of presence of the Almighty. So we're talking about two different things. Okay? It's a level of the presence or emanation. It's a form that Elohim would take. Okay? And so that was sitting over the mercy seat. That kind of element is different than when he took on the form where he ate lunch with Abraham, different than the form that he showed himself when he put Moses in the cleft of the rock. Okay? So it's not apples and apples here. We're talking about two different things. Okay?
Okay, Brian wants to know, is staying in the light separating oneself from all worldly intrigues, such as movie, entertainment, etc., things that people outside the camp run after?
Look, again, we're talking about how we got to balance John, 17 as well in this, where he says, I don't pray that you take them out of the world, but keep them from the world. So we are in a world that does a lot of things. And some of those things are, as I think was Paul would say, some things are allowed but not good for us. Okay? So it's not so much that doing certain things are outside of the light and are in darkness in themselves. They could lead to darkness, depending on what you do with them and how you handle them and how much you immerse yourself in them. But they not are in themselves, meaning that you've now stepped out of light into darkness. Although there are things you could do that are absolutely that, if they go against the structure called light. So there are things that are not within the structure of light that are outside, that are optional elements to you that you can or can't do. And if you do them or don't do them, they don't break Torah. They're not against Torah, but they could affect your walk ultimately if you continue to do them on any kind of regular basis. So you just have to be aware of that from that point of view. It's kind of like the whole thing with Mark 7 and other places where it talks about traditions. All right? Traditions are not Torah-based. Traditions are ways that we do certain things or don't do certain things as a habit or cultural thing that we do by tradition. But traditions could be darkness or lead to darkness if they do one of two things. If you elevate them equal to Torah, or if you use it to get in the way or interfere with your observance of Torah. Okay? So even things like traditions can fall into that category. So, so would it be wrong to go to a pool hall and shoot a game of pool or throw some darts and have a beer? No. I don't see anything where that could possibly be against Torah to do that. However, if you're going to be hanging out in a place like that, you're going to be being exposed to mostly darkness that would hang out in places like that. Not that only darkness hangs out in places. I mean, if you were there, you wouldn't be darkness necessarily. But maybe you wanted to shoot pool, which is nothing against that in Scripture. Maybe you want to throw darts. Maybe you'd like to have a drink. You're allowed to have a drink. But the elements and the people that tend to be drawn to some of these places could affect you and influence you and make a difference if you spend a lot of time there. Does that make sense? Okay? And by the way, you can find just as much of those type of people at the local restaurant as you can find in a bar. So don't just think like, well, I don't go to those places. Yeah, but you go to other places that are filled with those people. Every place you go is filled with darkness and filled with worldly people. Because you're not out of the world, you're not of the world, but you're still in it. You're just not of it. So let's be careful that we judge people that go to this or go do that. Well, so you don't do it because you don't feel comfortable, so don't do it. But running into those elements and those people, you run into them all the time anyway. You find them sitting right next to you anywhere, wherever you go. Okay, you walk through the mall, you go sit at a restaurant, you go into any store to do shopping, whatever you're doing, you're sitting on an airplane, sitting on the subway, driving on the highways, you're surrounded by people that a lot of them are in darkness and a lot of them are not, they're very much in the world. But how much are you participating with it? Okay? Next question.
Okay. Donna Stevens, Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi. Regarding the world, the soul, the divine, would the light be the Son, the Spirit within us, Yeshua HaMashiach? And would darkness refer to night, sin, and hell?
Okay, there are elements of the question that are problematic, but I will answer that question in the future parts. Okay, so if you still have that question when we're done, ask it again, but that stuff is going to be covered.
Okay. Elantha Khan, this is, let's see, Rabbi likened Israel crossing over to the Jordan to us waiting to cross over into the kingdom. What is our countdown? Israel had to wait for everyone but two to die. What are we to see? Okay, hold on. Let me check my countdown app.
We are... Okay, you get your first knock it off. We got to just stop this, okay? Stop, just walk it out until you die, okay? Just walk it out. Do what you're supposed to do, and you'll be where you're supposed to be. Stop worrying about countdowns. Let that be to all those guys who are false teachers and false prophets that are naming dates and are all wrong. The ones who name the Shemitahs and Jubilees, like you know who that is, or the ones that name the blood moons, and you know who those guys are, or the ones that say it's going to be every winter here, and they're going to start building the altar, and they're going to start with let those guys name the dates for you and be wrong every time. You focus on guarding, doing, clinging, observing, obeying, listening to the voice. Because I don't remember reading one verse in the hundreds of verses I read today that had anything to do with you trying to figure out timing. All of it was about figuring out doing. Okay? Work on that, please. I mean, I'm not picking on the person asking. It gets asked all the time. We are so still coming out of that Christian mindset and that needing to know Gnostic mindset of trying to time everything out. You know what? There was a lady almost killed in front of our building a couple of days ago. If she had died, I promise you, she was in her 20s or whatever, she had no idea that she had that little time left in her life. You don't know, so stop worrying. If I told you for sure, and I was right, that it was happening in 5 years, you don't know you're going to make it to 5 years. Or if I told you it was going to be in 20 years, you don't know you're going to make it to 20 years. So what help is it to know? Well, because then I'm going to ramp things up. Ramp it up now. You don't know if you're going to die tomorrow. He says, okay, well, let's go back to that verse that says, the stupid children, what was that verse? Let's go back to Jeremiah 4, was it? It says, okay, my people are foolish. They have not known me. They're stupid children. They have no understanding. They're too busy trying to figure out when things are going to happen instead of doing what I told them to do. That says it right there. Knock it off. Be about figuring out what's well-pleasing in the desire of Elohim and do what you're supposed to do. All right? Go ahead.
Wow. Let's see. Alyssa, and excuse me, you might have answered this in a roundabout way. Thank you, Steve.
Wait, let me mess with them one more time.
Okay.
If I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Because it would completely ruin your whole walk. If I knew, I'm not saying I do, but if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. It would ruin your walk. You'd be falsely motivated for wrong reasons, either to slow down or speed up, when you should be doing it for the right reasons, which has nothing to do with knowing the timing. All right, now ask the question. Now you're all going to wonder, does he know?
Millennium Kingdom 4 probably, right?
Exactly. No, 5 or 6. Go ahead.
Okay, Alyssa would like to know, the chaos in this country is great darkness. How do I keep from being drawn into this? It is so easy to be drawn in.
Focus on the structure he gives you that gives order in your life. Okay? He gives you times, days, ways to eat, ways to act, how to love each other, how to love him, how to treat each other. Focus on the structure he gives you. The world wants you to be all wrapped up in, and it's going to be ramped up even more soon because after all, we're heading towards 2020, which means we're heading towards the elections, and they want you to be wrapped up into that chaos and confusion. Don't get involved. Don't get yourself emotionally involved in whatever the world's excited about. The latest scandal, the latest this, the latest that, or whatever. Focus on his thing in your life and what you need to be doing in terms of applying that to you. Take his structure and bring it into your life. You need to be walking out Torah, working and providing. He says, 6 days you shall work. Do your work. 1 day you rest. Sabbath. Come to Sabbath. Eat right. Figure out how to be a husband or a wife, how to be a father or a mother, how to be a son or a daughter, how to be a member of a congregation. You got enough on your plate that'll bring order in your life to be worrying about all this other stuff. Okay? How do you know you're getting too wrapped up in things? You know what? Be aware of how much time you spend doing the things you do. And if you're spending a lot of time doing things that are not of his plan, then you're out of balance and you're likely to get sucked into something or drawn into something you shouldn't. Where do you spend your time? Where your time is where your heart is. We spend our time where we want to spend our time. So if you're not spending your time with him and in his word and in teachings and in study, then that's not where your heart is. Where do you spend your time? I mean, if you're binge watching Netflix, that's not where he is. Okay? All right, next.
Peter would like to know, if Yahweh was there in the beginning, how was it that it started in darkness? Oh, Yeshua, I'm sorry. If Yeshua was there in the beginning, how was it that it was started in darkness?
We have verse 3 that comes after verse 2. See, that's kind of the way things work, right? So the darkness is in verse 2, and then light was brought into that in verse 3. Now you got to remember that all of that you're talking about when you're talking about Yeshua and the Father, they are outside of the creation. Okay? So they brought, so let's rephrase this. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and earth. And the big lump of clay that he started with was formless and empty. So he is standing outside. He's got this table called the universe that he's creating, and this big lump of clay is formless, and then he brings form into it by bringing Yeshua into it, by bringing light into it. But you got to remember, they start out outside of all things and are still outside. They interact with creation on the levels they desire, but they're outside of time and space. Before there was anything, they were. Okay? So when you say, well, if he was in the beginning, no. John 1 tells you before there was this in the beginning, there was the Father and the Son. The Word was with Elohim and the Word was Elohim, and then creation came about. And in that creation, physical space and physical, space and time was brought into being and into existence, and then the truth, the Torah, the light, Yeshua, is then brought into it. It starts out as this formless template to write on, this formless lump of clay. Does that make sense now? Okay. Okay, Rabbi Tom?
Thank you. If I may go back to Shemot 10 for a minute.
Sure.
Okay. When Israel was in Egypt, they dwelt in the land of Goshen. And it says they had light. But the light was in their dwellings, not necessarily in all the land of Goshen, according to what we read here in the scriptures. So it's imperative for us to realize that we must have light in our dwellings, in our homes, even though the land is in darkness.
Awesome. Love it. Great point. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, you guys done over there? All right. Do we have the children? We need to get the children.